The name of the story, River Notes, Minneapolis. The piano keys carried the faint scent of polish and time. Claire pressed one gently, testing the sustain after her morning tuning, and the note shimmered through the empty studio like a held breath. She loved this hour, the in-between when the city outside was only beginning to stir, when the Mississippi fog still curled low over the water, and when her little studio on Nicollet Avenue felt like a sanctuary. Her life was built around small rituals like this. The quiet, the tuning, the lesson schedules pinned neatly to the corkboard, the row of polished uprights, and one grand piano at the center. To Claire, music was both profession and anchor. Teaching had become less about scales and fingering than about coaxing her students into discovering pieces of themselves. She didn't expect him that morning. The door opened with a hesitant chime. A tall man, bundled in a navy coat with hair mussed from the river wind, lingered on the threshold as though unsure if he belonged. His eyes found hers, and, for a heartbeat, he looked like someone who had rehearsed an introduction but forgotten the lines. "Hi," he said finally. His voice carried a low timbre, the kind that hinted he probably hummed to himself without noticing. "I heard you rent out practice space." Claire closed the piano lid and gave him a professional smile. "That's right. Are you looking for lessons, or just practice time?" "Just practice." His hands flexed nervously around the strap of his messenger bag. "I'm not exactly trained, but I write things. Songs, I guess." Something flickered in Claire's chest. Students came in with every kind of goal: rigid parents, childhood hobbies, retired dreamers. But it was rare to meet someone who admitted right away that they were chasing songs. "Then you've come to the right place," she said. "I rent by the hour or the month, depending on how serious you are." He smiled sheepishly, and she realized he wasn't the polished, confident type who usually came from the university's music program. He seemed more like the kind who scribbled on napkins in coffee shops. "I'll take the month," he said, surprising her with his decisiveness. "If that's okay." She led him to the upright by the window, where the late morning light often softened into gold. He ran a hand across the keys like he was greeting an old friend. She couldn't resist asking, "What do you do when you're not writing songs?" "I'm an engineer." He said it plainly, like he expected the two identities didn't belong in the same sentence. But sometimes equations aren't enough. She tilted her head, studying him. His eyes weren't the eyes of someone dabbling. They carried that restless hunger she'd seen in real musicians. "Claire," she offered, extending her hand. "Theo," he replied. His handshake was warm, steady, though his fingers lingered on hers half a second longer than polite. And just like that, their first chord was struck, quiet, tentative, but resonant. Theo returned 2 evenings later, his coat damp from the drizzle, his messenger bag heavier this time. Claire was finishing up with a young student when she caught his reflection in the glass, waiting with the patience of someone who didn't want to intrude. When the lesson ended and the girl skipped out, Theo set his bag on the piano bench. "Do you mind if I—" He gestured toward the grand in the center. "That one costs extra," she teased. He grinned, but when he sat and laid his fingers across the keys, the room shifted. His hands weren't trained. They stumbled, chords searching for footing, but the melody that rose was raw, earnest, and unlike anything she expected. A song half-formed, aching to be whole. Claire leaned against the wall, arms folded, letting the sound work through her. She could almost see the scaffolding of his thoughts, how his engineer's mind was mapping bridges of notes, how his heart filled the spaces in between. When he finished, he looked up, self-conscious. "Saw the—" That was rough. She shook her head. "No, that was alive." The color in his cheeks deepened. "I've been working on it for months. Never played on a real piano before." Claire stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. "What's it called?" He hesitated. "Nothing yet. Maybe it doesn't deserve a name. All songs do." She smiled softly. "Maybe you just haven't listened closely enough to hear it." For the first time in a long while, Claire felt the familiar spark she'd almost forgotten, the one that had led her to music before teaching became her safety net. It startled her, the way this near stranger's hesitant chords stirred something unpracticed in her. The rain outside deepened into rhythm, and the city beyond the window blurred into watercolor. Inside the studio, only the piano breathed. The next week, they settled into a quiet rhythm. Theo rented the piano 3 evenings a week, and Claire, though she told herself she was simply locking up late, found excuses to linger. Sometimes she corrected his posture or nudged a chord toward cleaner resolution. Other times, she just listened, letting the rawness of his attempts remind her of why she had once chased music with such abandon. One night, as he struggled with the transition, Claire slid onto the bench beside him. Without asking, she laid her hands on the keys, building the bridge his fingers couldn't find. Their notes met, hesitant at first, then intertwining until the line smoothed. Theo froze, watching her hands, then wrist following. Together, the melody took flight. When the final chord fell, the silence between them felt as loud as the music had been. He exhaled, almost laughing. Guess music really is another language. Claire's pulse raced, though she kept her tone light. One most people forget to learn. And so it began, not in declarations or plans, but in the spaces between notes, in the way their songs brushed against each other and quietly rewrote what both thought they knew about connection. Theo discovered quickly that the studio wasn't just a room with pianos. It was Claire. Her presence lingered in every careful detail. The vases of dried wildflowers on the windowsills, the clean scent of lemon oil on polished wood, the shelves stacked with well-loved sheet music, corners curled from years of turning pages. He didn't tell her that part, but he thought about it every time he settled in. She belonged here, the same way river water belonged to its current. One Thursday evening, Claire arrived early to find Theo already playing. He hadn't noticed her slip in. His head was bent over the keys, his mouth shaping words silently as he tested chords. The melody was slow, hesitant, but beneath it was something unmistakable, longing. She stayed in the doorway, listening, until the song wavered and stopped. "That one had a story," she said gently. Theo jumped, spinning on the bench, eyes wide. Then he laughed, embarrassed. "You scare me." "Sorry," she said, though she wasn't. "What were you writing?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Just trying to put something into music I don't know how to say out loud." She walked closer, her heels soft against the wood floor. "That's what music is for." Their eyes met, and in that moment Claire realized she wanted to know his unspoken words. A week later, on a Saturday morning when the city was drenched in sun, Theo suggested they meet outside the studio. "There's a spot by the river," he told her, "where the water carries sound. I think music would belong there." Claire hesitated. She hadn't played for anyone outside her students in years. But something about the way he asked, half hopeful, half afraid, made her say yes. They met near the stone arch bridge, where the Mississippi surged wide and restless beneath the span. Theo carried a worn acoustic guitar. Claire had nothing but her hands and her caution. They found a quiet patch of grass, hidden enough to feel theirs. Theo strummed a few uneven chords before offering the guitar. "Want to?" Claire shook her head. "Piano's my language. I'll just follow your lead." So he played, haltingly at first, but then with a rhythm that seemed to echo the river's current. Claire hummed, then sang, soft, uncertain, until her voice wrapped around his notes like a ribbon. The duet wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. They laughed between verses, stumbled into harmonies, found new ones by accident. The sound rose into the sky, where seagulls cut across the light. Passers-by slowed, smiled, but it felt like no one else existed. At one point, Theo broke off, his gaze fixed on her. "You know," he said quietly, "you sing the way most people dream." Claire's cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. "And you write like someone who finally remembered what his heart sounds like." It was the closest either of them had come to admitting what lingered beneath the music. Later, sitting by the water with the guitar resting between them, Theo spoke first. "My dad used to write songs," he said, watching the current. "He never recorded them. Said music was just meant to live in the air and vanish. I'm afraid of doing the same, of letting it all vanish before it means anything." Claire listened, her hand brushing a blade of grass. What did you do with his songs? Kept them in notebooks. But I don't play them. Not yet. Why? Because they sound like him. And I'm not ready for that. The confession settled heavy between them. Claire wanted to reach across, to bridge the silence with touch. But instead she spoke the truth she rarely shared. I used to perform, she said softly. Competitions, recitals, even some small concerts. But somewhere along the way, I froze. My hand would shake so badly I couldn't get through a piece. So I stopped. Teaching was safer. Theo turned to her then, his expression stripped of anything but understanding. So the river keeps both our secrets. She laughed faintly, though her throat tightened. Guess it does. The weeks that followed wove them tighter together. In the studio, their sessions turned into collaborations. Claire added chords to Theo's sketches, while he coaxed her into singing more. Their shared music became something neither could have built alone, a diary without words. One evening, after playing late, Theo lingered by the door. There's a recital next month, he said, almost too casually. Small one. Community center, local musicians. I thought, maybe we could perform something together. Claire's stomach twisted. The old fears surged, the stage lights, the silence before the first note. But Theo's eyes held none of the pressure she once felt from teachers or judges. Only hope. I don't know if I can, she whispered. He smiled gently. Then we'll make sure you're not alone on that stage. And for the first time in years, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could. The weeks leading to the recital were unlike any Claire had known in years. Her evenings, once predictable with scales and student recitals, now blurred into late sessions with Theo. Their pieces grew out of fragments, stitched together with trial and laughter, until they finally found the one that felt true, a song both of them could call theirs. It wasn't flawless. Parts of it leaned on Theo's earnest, searching melodies, while others carried Claire's steady, practiced precision. But the imperfections didn't bother them. If anything, they made the piece honest. The closer the performance drew, the more Claire's old nerves returned. Her hands shook some nights, phantom tremors from memories of stages where she had faltered. She told Theo more than once she couldn't go through with it. But he never pressed. He only said, then we'll stop. Music doesn't need a stage. And every time, it was that gentleness, not pressure, that steadied her. The community center smelled faintly of varnish and old paper programs. Folding chairs were lined in rows, the stage no higher than a step. Local musicians tuned violins and strummed guitars, their chatter filling the air. It wasn't grand, wasn't intimidating. But to Claire, her heart still raced as though she were about to walk into a hall of 1,000 expectant eyes. Theo found her in the wings, adjusting the strap on his guitar. His presence grounded her, the calm steadiness she had come to rely on. You okay? He asked quietly. She shook her head. Not really. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers. Then just look at me when we play. Pretend it's only us. Like by the river. Her breath hitched, but she nodded. When her names were called, they stepped onto the small stage. The light was warm, not blinding. Faces blurred into a soft crowd. Neighbors, families, friends of other performers. Claire sat at the upright, her hands hovering above the keys. Theo strummed the opening chord. It was simple, but the familiarity of it, the chord they had played 100 times, anchored her. She pressed the first notes on the piano, her fingers trembling for only a moment before settling into rhythm. The song rose slowly, like morning breaking over water. His guitar carried the melody at first, her piano weaving in underneath. Then she began to sing. Her voice shook on the first line, but Theo's harmony slipped in beside hers, steadying it. Together, they filled the room. As the piece swelled, Claire forgot the crowd, forgot the stage. She saw only him, his eyes meeting hers between chords, his smile quiet but fierce, as if telling her she was more than her fear. And in that moment, she believed him. When the final note fell, silence lingered for half a beat before the audience erupted in applause. Claire's chest heaved, her hands still tingling. She glanced at Theo, who only grinned at her like they'd just built a bridge that had been waiting to exist. Later, outside in the cool night air, Claire leaned against the brick wall of the center, her nerves finally unraveling. Theo stood beside her, guitar case in hand. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected, her smile breaking wide. He nodded, then hesitated, as though weighing a chord before striking it. "Claire, all those songs, they weren't just music. They were," he broke off, searching her face. "They were everything I couldn't say to you." Her breath caught. For so long she had hidden behind her own silence, behind her studio walls and her careful teaching routines. But tonight, in front of him, she felt braver. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let me answer you in the only language I trust." And before either could retreat, she kissed him. Soft, sure, the way their music had always been. Two notes finding harmony. The applause had long faded, the city moving on around them. But for Claire and Theo, the world was distilled into that moment. The warmth of the night, the river flowing not far away, and the knowledge that their songs no longer needed to vanish into air. They had found each other, and that was music enough. The end. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.